You may not have lived through 2007, or maybe you did, but even if you did and you've forgotten it, maybe we've got those vibes again. But let's get specific. What does that even mean? Well, the first thing is, remember a couple of weeks ago I told you we got to see Ohio State and Texas lose, because at that point there will be no perceived elite teams out there. That means everybody's beatable. Even Georgia's lost. Oregon got pushed to the wire against every team they played from the state of Idaho. So you may look great in the moment, but not too far in your rearview mirror, even if you look good right now. There is a shaky past. And so, well, what do you know? 2 weeks later, Texas has lost and kind of got humbled in the process. And we've seen Ohio State lose. Now, Ohio State played a good game, but they still lost. So everyone is gettable. And we also have another reality that we need to keep in mind. There are 3 active head coaches in college football who have won national titles. One of them will not be in the conversation this year. It's Mack Brown at North Carolina. The other 2 are Dabo and Kirby. Both of them are in the mix right now. Outside of that, no matter who it is that starts to emerge down the stretch, none of them have been there before. Or in the case of Orion Day, he's been there in the national title game, but hasn't won one and got blown out in the title game. So there are going to be a lot of new heads at the table, regardless of who emerges here, because we've got a 12-team playoff this year. But if we don't have an elite team, that's a precursor to some really crazy stuff. Like this weekend, we've got a weekend where a lot of these teams are big favorites. Oregon, I'll just randomly pick the Ducks. They're playing Illinois. None of you are paying attention to that game. They're a 3-touchdown favorite. If we have elite teams, you have reason not to pay attention to those games. If we don't have elite teams, you cannot take any of these Saturdays or even a block on a Saturday for granted, because you have no idea what could be sprung on you. Here's the next part of the recipe for chaos. We got 2 conferences right now, the Big Ten and the ACC, where the conference officials, the powers that be, just have their fingers crossed that they don't arrive at a doomsday scenario. And that doomsday scenario is that they have 3 undefeated teams in conference play. And because we got rid of divisions, this is possible, albeit a small mathematical possibility. Everyone understood when they got rid of divisions, it is possible, because of how big these conferences are, that if we get rid of divisions, we could have more than 2 undefeated teams in conference play. Well, right now, I've got bad news, good news, or just news, depending on which seat you are in. Oregon is undefeated. Penn State is undefeated. Indiana is undefeated in conference play, and they don't play each other. So you could still look at that and say, oh, but certainly Ohio State will beat Penn State, right? Well, the line on that game is about 3.5 or 4 right now. So you can think that's a certainty if you want to. I don't think it is. You could say, well, I mean, certainly Indiana's not going to go undefeated, are they? I didn't think they were going to body bag Nebraska last week. I didn't think game day was going to be in Bloomington this week. So you can throw that word certainty around, and I'm sure the data/analytics folks out there would tell you there's a microscopic chance of this happening. But problem is, every Saturday I turn on my TV and I see some team that the real-time analytics had a 99% chance of winning that ended up losing a game. So that stuff happens a lot more than it should, which makes me question that whole analytics game as it relates to live game tracking. And in the ACC, not to be outdone, we have another potential conundrum on our hands. Clemson is undefeated in conference play. Miami is undefeated in conference play. SMU is undefeated in conference play. And for that matter, Pitt is. But Pitt ends up playing, Jesse, do they play both Clemson and Miami? I know they play at least one of them. So we do have Pitt probably on the outside looking in on this, but the others don't play each other. Clemson does not play Miami in the regular season. SMU doesn't play either one of them in the regular season. So do we have a little shark fin offshore in the form of 3 undefeated teams? And then I don't even want to get into the tiebreakers because I don't know what they are, because I didn't bother to check, because I just want to find out with the rest of you. Like I saw multiple paragraphs. Paragraph was the plural of paragraphs. I saw that the other day, and I did not even get more than 2 sentences in. Anytime this happens, I just hit up Uncle Dennis Dodd, to you, Uncle Dennis to me. I just say, hey, what would the rule be here? We're not there yet. Third ingredient in the little chaos bucket here is the great SEC unknown. And that simply means a couple of things. Number one, Who are the favorites in this conference? You guys watched, just like I did, Saturday night. We had Texas and we had Georgia, right? And they played in Austin, and Georgia gets a resounding win. And Texas isn't out of anything by any stretch. Georgia, the presumptive favorite. At FanDuel, Georgia's the favorite to win the conference right now. So, like, those are the two favorites, right? Well, the problem is, no, in the standings, they're not. Because in the standings, I got the top two teams in the SEC about to play each other this Saturday night, and they are not Georgia and Texas. They are LSU, and they are Texas A&M. Now, I know what you assume. One of them's going to lose Saturday, and then the one that remains undefeated, they'll drop a game because you probably don't think A&M and or LSU are good enough to go undefeated in conference play. And you know what? I probably agree with you. The model probably agrees with you. But let's also remember something else. Maybe Texas isn't done losing. Maybe Georgia loses another game. There are no foregone conclusions in college football this year. And so, however that shakes out is however it shakes out. But then the follow-up to that, part two of the great SEC unknown, is how many two-loss SEC teams will profile as playoff teams against, let's say, teams from other conferences? Because we are headed towards a world now where maybe we were wrong. Maybe there won't be a three-loss team in the playoff. Maybe as it's stacking up right now, what do we have, Jesse? We've got 10 undefeated teams right now. Not in the SEC, that would be a record. We've got 10 undefeated teams in the country, 21 lost teams, and 18 two-loss teams. Now, it's week 9, so a lot of that will sort itself out. A lot of them will play each other. Yes, that will get shaved down, not quite exponentially, but it will get shaved down as the weeks go on. But as it stands right now, I get it if you tell me that you don't think there's going to be room for a three-loss team. I had many of you DMing me that. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say you're right. And let's say there are enough two-loss teams. Well, that leads us to a big mess. And it leads to future ramifications on it, because at that point, you're going to have, let's say, a two-loss Tennessee or a two-loss Missouri, a two-loss LSU, or who knows how it shakes out. The point is you're going to have a little batch of two-loss SEC teams there. And then maybe you have a one-loss team from the Big 12, or maybe there's a two-loss team from the ACC whose second loss was in the conference title game. And you're going to have to ask yourself, if you're a committee member, who deserves to be in. And I have told you, as I did call this in the spring, and I'll tell you again, I've told you, I don't think the pendulum automatically swings towards the SEC. I think the opposite could happen. And what I've meant by that is, you think the SEC may get blind benefit of the doubt, and they may. But there is another world where the committee looks and says, well, we've already put 3 SEC teams in, or 4 SEC teams in, and if it comes down to an A-B resume test, and you're measuring whether to put a 5th SEC team in versus a 2nd Big 12 or ACC, I'm not quite sure it just blindly goes towards the SEC, although most people think it will. I'm not totally sure you don't have committee members say, well, the SEC's already got 4. I mean, we need to give another one to someone else. These are humans. They're not all from the SEC, by the way. These are humans on that committee, so that could happen. And the reason I mention ramifications is because the SEC, just like the Big Ten, had their little summit here recently in Nashville, and one of the main topics of conversation is, if we don't get enough playoff spots, are we going to sign off on this format beyond 2026? Spoiler alert, they are not. So if Greg Sankey looks and thinks that his member institutions got screwed out of playoff spots, or Tony Petitti in the Big Ten, or doomsday scenario, both of them feel that way, they could just take the old proverbial ball and go home. That'd be chaotic for all the wrong reasons. There is another just pure picture of chaos out there. It's called the Big 12. It's beautiful. We call it America's College Football Conference on this show. So I always encourage you to enjoy the Big 12 for what it is. The Big 12 is a standalone product. The Big 12, you don't need playoff implications on the games because every one of them's close, every one of them's competitive, everybody can challenge everybody on any given Saturday. It is the most pure any given Saturday conference out there. Even above and beyond any of the others, the competitive balance is insane week to week in the Big 12. Now, mathematically, that means you got a low likelihood of teams going undefeated. And you also, in general, even if someone does go undefeated, should understand your future national champion's probably not in the Big 12, which is A-OK, because it's okay to just enjoy a conference for what it is, and that is a standalone Saturdays in the fall special. Having said that, that is not the structure of the playoff. The structure of the playoff is such that if you win a conference, you're probably getting an auto bid, and the Big 12 champ will. And then there's the follow-up question, which becomes more and more relevant by the week. And that is, as unlikely as it is, what happens if Iowa State and Brigham Young face off undefeated in the Big 12 title game? The winner goes to the playoff and has a top 4 seed. What happens to the loser? Pause, just for effect there. What happens to the loser of that game? It's unlikely, but not impossible. We're sitting here in a world where my working theory is the committee is not going to punish the loser of the SEC championship game too much, or the loser of the Big Ten championship game too much. I don't think they're knocking that loser down behind teams that sat idly by on Conference Championship Saturday, because that paints the picture that you got punished for playing in your conference title game. But I'm not sure how they'll handle the loser of the Big 12 championship game. And so that is a great unknown, because that could be chaotic. Everyone's just counting on the Big 12 conference title game loser to otherwise not have a resume that warrants one of those playoff spots. And I agree with you. That's what I expect too. But what if we're wrong? And then let me also remind you, Kansas State is still in this thing with one loss. We have got Texas Tech that's got one conference loss. Cincy's got one conference loss. You know who else only has one conference loss? Colorado. So here's another little scenario. Let me kick you this. Let me just say Iowa State goes undefeated and they're playing in the Big 12 title game. And let's say Colorado plays them and they're 10-2. They're 9-3. But they're there. They emerge from the wreckage and they're there and they win the thing. They're the automatic Big 12 representative as the conference champ. How does the committee handle 12-1 Iowa State or 12-1 Brigham Young if it's them? That's a chaos scenario that I don't think many people expected. But you know what? It shouldn't be a surprise, because a mere 2 years ago, the Big 12 was good enough to have their conference championship loser make the playoff. You remember that, right? You may not. See, revisionist history tells you that TCU won the Big 12 2 years ago en route to a national championship game appearance, but they didn't. They went undefeated all year. They lost to Kansas State in the Big 12 title game, but their resume was so good that they got put in the 4-team playoff anyway. And then, lo and behold, they beat Michigan and went to the national title game. So we have precedent. Kansas State went to the Sugar Bowl that year. Point being, 2 years ago, both of them would have probably been in a 12-team playoff. So why not this year? Also, where did I put that? Okay, so the odds to make the playoff right now, just so you guys are aware, we hit up FanDuel earlier today. We made sure all this is right. The odds to make the playoff is a really popular market over at FanDuel right now. And the odds to make the playoff, this doesn't mean you have to pick the seed. It doesn't mean they have to win a game just to be in the thing. Oregon is an overwhelming favorite, minus 3,500 if you want to bet that the Ducks just make the playoff. Georgia's the next closest at minus 1,700. Texas, Ohio State, Penn State's minus 600 to make the playoff. Recalibrate your mind. Work with me here. It's not a 4-team playoff anymore. Some people who advocated for expansion are still in 4-team mode in their mind. And I say, hey, man, I think Penn State's going to make the playoff. And you're like, oh, no, they're not. Yes, they are. They're minus 600 to make it right now. They'd have to drop a game to Wisconsin, probably drop another game to not make the playoff. So they're in a good spot right now. Miami's in a good spot. Clemson's in a good spot. Do you understand? Alabama is still minus 110 to make the playoff. And Alabama looks horrible right now. It should be noted Bama and Boise have the same odds to make the playoff, and Iowa State has better odds than Bama to make the playoff. But you choose your fighter there. The odds to make the playoff, we continue to go down the list. LSU, I mean, we could go all the way down to Colorado at plus 750, and that's as of today now. Plus 750, you got to go a long way down before you start getting into really, really long odds of teams to make the playoff. So in a 12-team playoff field, honestly, it should still look like that in Week 9. It should still be like that, especially in a year where we have no elite teams. But 10 undefeateds right now, 21 loss, 18-2 loss. think it's going to be a very chaotic November.